Welcome to Beneath the Brilliance, Unveiling Benjamin Franklin's remarkable life. One of the leading figures of early American history, Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, was a statesman, author, publisher, scientist, inventor and diplomat. Born into a Boston family of modest means, Franklin had little formal education. He went on to start a successful printing business in Philadelphia and grew wealthy. Franklin was deeply active in public affairs in his adopted city, where he helped launch a lending library, hospital and college and garnered acclaim for his experiments with electricity, among other projects. During the American Revolution, he served in the Second Continental Congress and helped to draft the Declaration of Independence in 1776. He also negotiated the 1783 Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War, 1775-83. In 1787, in his final significant act of public service, he was a delegate to the convention that produced the U.S. Constitution. Benjamin Franklin. Loaded, 0%. Progress, 0%. Pause unmute. Current time 0:42. Slash. Duration time 1:48. Settings full screen. Benjamin Franklin's early years. Benjamin Franklin was born on January 17, 1706, in colonial Boston. His father, Josiah Franklin, 1657 to 1745, a native of England, was a candle and soap maker who married twice and had 17 children. Franklin's mother was Abia Folger, 1667 to 1752, of Nantucket, Massachusetts, Josiah's second wife. Franklin was the eighth of Abia and Josiah's 10 offspring. Franklin's formal education was limited and ended when he was 10, however, he was an avid reader and taught himself to become a skilled writer. In 1718, at age 12, he was apprenticed to his older brother James, a Boston printer. By age 16, Franklin was contributing essays, under the pseudonym Silence Do Good, to a newspaper published by his brother. At age 17, Franklin ran away from his apprenticeship to Philadelphia, where he found work as a printer. In late 1724, he traveled to London, England, and again found employment in the printing business. Benjamin Franklin, printer and publisher. Benjamin Franklin returned to Philadelphia in 1726, and 2 years later opened a printing shop. The business became highly successful, producing a range of materials, including government pamphlets, books and currency. In 1729, Franklin became the owner and publisher of a colonial newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, which proved popular, and to which he contributed much of the content, often using pseudonyms. Franklin achieved fame and further financial success with Poor Richard's Almanac, which he published every year from 1733 to 1758. The almanac became known for its witty sayings, which often had to do with the importance of diligence and frugality, such as early to bed and early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. In 1730, Franklin began living with Deborah Reed, circa 1705-74, the daughter of his former Philadelphia landlady, as his common-law wife. Reed's first husband had abandoned her, however, due to bigamy laws, she and Franklin could not have an official wedding ceremony. Franklin and Reed had a son, Francis Folger Franklin, 1732-36, who died of smallpox at age 4, and a daughter, Sarah Franklin Bache, 1743-1808. Franklin had another son, William Franklin, circa 1730-1813, who was born out of wedlock. William Franklin served as the last colonial governor of New Jersey, from 1763 to 1776, and remained loyal to the British during the American Revolution. He died in exile in England. Benjamin Franklin and Philadelphia. As Franklin's printing business prospered, he became increasingly involved in civic affairs. Starting in the 1730s, He helped establish a number of community organizations in Philadelphia, including a lending library. It was founded in 1731, a time when books weren't widely available in the colonies, and remained the largest U.S. public library until the 1850s, the city's first fire company, a police patrol in the American Philosophical Society, a group devoted to the sciences and other scholarly pursuits. Franklin also organized the Pennsylvania militia, raised funds to build a city hospital and spearheaded a program to pave and light city streets. Additionally, Franklin was instrumental in the creation of the Academy of Philadelphia, a college which opened in 1751 and became known as the University of Pennsylvania in 1791. Franklin also was a key figure in the colonial postal system. In 1737, the British appointed him Postmaster of Philadelphia, and he went on to become, in 1753, Joint Postmaster General for all the American colonies. In this role he instituted various measures to improve mail service. However, the British dismissed him from the job in 1774 because he was deemed too sympathetic to colonial interests. In July 1775, the Continental Congress appointed Franklin the first Postmaster General of the United States, giving him authority over all post offices from Massachusetts to Georgia. He held this position until November 1776, when he was succeeded by his son-in-law. The first U.S. postage stamps, issued on July 1, 1847, featured images of Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. Benjamin Franklin's inventions. In 1748, Franklin, then 42 years old, had expanded his printing business throughout the colonies and become successful enough to stop working. Retirement allowed him to concentrate on public service and also pursue more fully his longtime interest in science. In the 1740s, he conducted experiments that contributed to the understanding of electricity, and invented the lightning rod, which protected buildings from fires caused by lightning. In 1752, he conducted his famous kite experiment and demonstrated that lightning is electricity. Franklin also coined a number of electricity-related terms, including battery, charge and conductor. In addition to electricity, Franklin studied a number of other topics, including ocean currents, meteorology, causes of the common cold and refrigeration. He developed the Franklin stove, which provided more heat while using less fuel than other stoves, and bifocal eyeglasses, which allow for distance and reading use. In the early 1760s, Franklin invented a musical instrument called the glass harmonica. Composers such as Ludwig Beethoven, 1770 to 1827, and Wolfgang Mozart, 1756-91 wrote music for Franklin's harmonica. However, by the early part of the 19th century, the once popular instrument had largely fallen out of use. Benjamin Franklin and the American Revolution. In 1754, at a meeting of colonial representatives in Albany, New York, Franklin proposed a plan for uniting the colonies under a national Congress. Although his Albany plan was rejected, it helped lay the groundwork for the Articles of Confederation, which became the first Constitution of the United States when ratified in 1781. In 1757, Franklin traveled to London as a representative of the Pennsylvania Assembly, to which he was elected in 1751. Over several years, he worked to settle a tax dispute and other issues involving descendants of William Penn, 1644 to 1718, the owners of the colony of Pennsylvania. After a brief period back in the U.S., Franklin lived primarily in London until 1775. While he was abroad, the British government began, in the mid-1760s, to impose a series of regulatory measures to assert greater control over its American colonies. In 1766, Franklin testified in the British Parliament against the Stamp Act of 1765, which required that all legal documents, newspapers, books, playing cards and other printed materials in the American colonies carry a tax stamp. Although the Stamp Act was repealed in 1766, additional regulatory measures followed, leading to ever-increasing anti-British sentiment and eventual armed uprising in the American colonies. Franklin returned to Philadelphia in May 1775, shortly after the Revolutionary War. 1775-83 had begun, and was selected to serve as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, America's governing body at the time. In 1776, he was part of the 5-member committee that helped draft the Declaration of Independence, in which the 13 American colonies declared their freedom from British rule. That same year, Congress sent Franklin to France to enlist that nation's help with the Revolutionary War. In February 1778, the French signed a military alliance with America and went on to provide soldiers, supplies and money that proved critical to America's victory in the war. As minister to France starting in 1778, Franklin helped negotiate and draft the 1783 Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. Benjamin Franklin's later years. In 1785, Franklin left France and returned once again to Philadelphia. In 1787, he was a Pennsylvania delegate to the Constitutional Convention. The 81-year-old Franklin was the convention's oldest delegate. At the end of the convention, in September 1787, he urged his fellow delegates to support the heavily debated new document. The U.S. Constitution was ratified by the required 9 states in June 1788, and George Washington, 1732–99, was inaugurated as America's first president in April 1789. Franklin died a year later, at age 84, on April 17, 1790, in Philadelphia. Following a funeral that was attended by an estimated 20,000 people, he was buried in Philadelphia's Christ Church Cemetery. In his will, he left money to Boston and Philadelphia, which was later used to establish a trade school and a science museum and fund scholarships and other community projects. More than 200 years after his death, Franklin remains one of the most celebrated figures in U.S. history. His image appears on the $100 bill, and towns, schools and businesses across America are named for him. 11 interesting facts about Benjamin Franklin. 1. He only had 2 years of formal education. The man, considered the most brilliant American of his age, rarely saw the inside of a classroom. Franklin spent just 2 years attending Boston Latin School and a private academy before joining the family candle and soap-making business. By age 12, he was serving as an indentured apprentice at a printing shop owned by his brother, James. Young Benjamin made up for his lack of schooling by spending what little money he earned on books, often going without food to afford new volumes. He also honed his composition skills by reading essays and articles and then rewriting them from memory. Despite being almost entirely self-taught, Franklin later helped found the school that became the University of Pennsylvania and received honorary degrees from Harvard, Yale, the College of William and Mary, the University of St. Andrews and Oxford. 2. Franklin became a hit writer as a teenager. After his brother James founded a weekly newspaper called the New England Courant in the 1720s, a 16-year-old Franklin began secretly submitting essays and commentary as Silence Dogood, a fictitious widow who offered homespun musings on everything from fashion and marriage to women's rights and religion. The letters were hugely popular, and Mrs. Dogood soon received several marriage proposals from eligible bachelors in Boston. Franklin penned 14 do-good essays before unmasking himself as their author, much to his jealous brother's chagrin. Sick of the toil and beatings he endured as James' apprentice, the teenage sensation then fled Boston the following year and settled in Philadelphia, the city that would remain his adopted hometown for the rest of his life. 3. He spent half his life in unofficial retirement. Franklin arrived in Philadelphia in 1723 practically penniless, but over the next 2 decades he became enormously wealthy as a print shop owner, land speculator and publisher of the popular Poor Richard's Almanac. By 1748, the 42-year-old was rich enough to hang up his printer's apron and become a gentleman of leisure. Franklin's retirement allowed him to spend his remaining 42 years studying science and devising inventions such as the lightning rod, bifocal glasses and a more efficient heating stove. It also gave him the freedom to devote himself to public service. Despite never running for elected office, he served as a delegate to the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention, diplomat and ambassador to France and Sweden, the first Postmaster General and the President of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania. 4. Franklin designed a musical instrument used by Mozart and Beethoven. Among Franklin's more unusual inventions is his glass harmonica, an instrument designed to replicate the otherworldly sound that a wet finger makes when rubbed along the rim of a glass. He made his first prototype in 1761 by having a London glassmaker build him 37 glass orbs of different sizes and pitches, which he then mounted on a spindle controlled by a foot pedal. To play the instrument, the user would simply wet their fingers, rotate the apparatus and then touch the glass pieces to create individual tones or melodies. The harmonica would go on to amass a considerable following during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Thousands were manufactured, and the likes of Mozart, Beethoven and Strauss all composed music for it. Franklin would later write that of all my inventions, the glass harmonica has given me the greatest personal satisfaction. 5. He was a reluctant revolutionary. Franklin was among the last of the founding fathers to come out in favor of full separation from Britain. Having lived in London for several years and held royal appointments, he instead pushed for peaceful compromise and the preservation of the empire, once writing that, "Every encroachment on rights is not worth a rebellion." When the Boston Tea Party took place in 1773, he dubbed it an act of violent injustice on our part and insisted that the East India Company should be compensated for its losses. Franklin had soured on the monarchy by the time he returned to the United States for the Second Continental Congress in 1775, but his past support for King George III earned him the suspicion of many of his fellow patriots. Before he publicly announced his support for American independence, a few even suspected he might be a British spy. 6. Franklin created a phonetic alphabet. While living in London in 1768, Franklin embarked on a project to give the alphabet a more natural order. Annoyed by the many inconsistencies in English spelling, he devised his own phonetic system that ditched the redundant consonants C, J, Q, W, X and Y and added 6 new letters, each designed to represent its own specific vocal sound. Franklin unveiled his scheme for a new alphabet and a reformed mode of spelling in an essay published in 1779, but later scrapped the project after it failed to arouse public interest. 7. His son was a British loyalist. Along with the 2 children he had with his wife, Deborah Lee, Franklin also fathered an illegitimate son named William around 1730. The two were once close friends and partners. William helped Franklin with his famous kite experiment, but they later had a major falling out over the American Revolution. While Franklin joined in calling for independence from the mother country, William remained a staunch Tory who branded the Patriots intemperate zealots and refused to resign his post as the royal governor of New Jersey. He spent 2 years in a colonial prison for opposing the revolution and later became a leader in a loyalist group before moving to England at the end of the war. The elder Franklin never forgave his son for taking up arms against me. He all but cut William out of his will, arguing, "The part he acted against me in the late war, will account for my leaving him no more of an estate he endeavored to deprive me of." 8. Franklin was a fashion icon in France. In 1776, the Continental Congress sent Franklin to France to seek military aid for the revolution. The 70-year-old was already world-renowned for his lighting experiments. The French even called their electrical experimenters Franklinists, but his fame soared to new heights after his arrival in Paris. Franklin capitalized on the French conception of Americans as rustic frontiersmen by dressing plainly and wearing a fur hat, which soon became his trademark and appeared in countless French portraits and medallions. Women even took to imitating the cap with oversized wigs in a style called coiffure à la Franklin. When Franklin later traded the fur cap for a white hat during the signing of the 1778 treaty between France and the United States, white-colored headgear instantly became a fashion trend among the men of Paris. 9. He spent his later years as an abolitionist. Franklin owned at least 2 slaves during his life, both of whom worked as household servants, but in his old age, he came to view slavery as a vile institution that ran counter to the principles of the American Revolution. He took over as president of a Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society in 1787, and in 1790 he presented a petition to Congress urging it to grant liberty to those unhappy men who alone in this land of freedom are degraded into perpetual bondage. While the petition was ignored, Franklin kept up the fight until his death a few months later and even included a provision in his will that required his daughter and son-in-law to free their slave to get their inheritance. 10. Franklin left Boston and Philadelphia an unusual gift in his will. When he died in April 1790, Franklin willed £2,000 to his birthplace of Boston and his adopted home of Philadelphia. The largesse came with an unusual caveat: for its first 100 years, the money was to be placed in a trust and only used to provide loans to local tradesmen. A portion could then be spent, but the rest would remain off limits for another 100 years, at which point the cities could use it as they saw fit. Boston and Philadelphia followed Franklin's wishes, and by 1990 their funds were worth $4.5 million and $2 million, respectively. The two towns have since used the windfall to help finance the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia and the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology in Boston. Philadelphia also put some of its funds toward scholarships for students attending trade schools. 11. He's a member of the International Swimming Hall of Fame. Franklin had a lifelong love of swimming that began during his childhood in Boston. One of his first inventions was a pair of wooden hand paddles that he used to propel himself through the Charles River, and he wrote of once using a kite to skim across a pond. While living in England in the 1760s, he displayed such an impressive array of swimming strokes during a dip in Thames that a friend offered to help him open his own swimming school. Franklin declined the offer, but he remained a proponent of swimming instruction for the rest of his life, once writing, "Every parent would be glad to have their children skilled in swimming." His aquatic exploits have since earned him an honorary induction into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.